What's up, guys? Welcome to Fed by Fire. I'm Christian Whitlow, and today I want to do something a little different. I want to show y'all something I'm very proud of, and I'm going to be showing you the inside of our house. It's official. We're moving into our house, and I didn't believe it until we went over there and cleaned, but let's get into it. Alrighty, so, this goes back to my childhood, and I'm going to talk about how important, home is to a younger person. If you would have told me when I was a kid that one day I would be standing inside a house that me and my wife officially own, I wouldn't have believed you, not for a second. I would have looked at you like you were fucking crazy. Not because I didn't want that life. Honestly, I think deep down everybody wants stability. Everybody wants somewhere that they can call home. But when you grow up a certain type of way, sometimes you start believing that certain things just aren't meant for people like you. And for my entire childhood, my mom, she never bought a house. My dad didn't buy a house till way later. So my parents always rented. We moved from place to place a lot, and that became normal for me. And that's just what it was. I didn't grow up with the mindset of one day we're going to have our own home. I grew up with the mindset of wherever we are living, we're going to live in there right now until something changes. So we're going to go all the way back to when I was 6 years old and my parents got divorced. This was the first house, the house I spent 9 years of my life. And so when my parents split, my dad moved into my grandma's trailer park, which those have a lot of their own stories by themselves. It's another place I grew up. But my mom continued renting, and looking back, I realized my mom was doing everything she could with what she had. As a kid, you don't always understand the struggle behind the scenes and how much effort and time it takes to make this shit happen, to make presents appear at Christmas, to make school clothes appear. It takes blood, sweat, and tears. And you don't understand the sacrifices that your parents made until you're making them yourself. And that's one thing I'll say, my dad, he took me every year school shopping, and, my mom as well, she never let me get made fun of because of what I was wearing. She always had me the nicest stuff, and that's one thing I can say about her. But what I saw was that we were moving backwards in life. I remember, so we moved out of the house that I had spent the majority of my life in, and we moved into a trailer right across from Sonic. And I remember thinking that I just had dropped down a level, like from middle class to lower middle class. And truth be told, I didn't want anybody to know that that's where I was living. But eventually it became, a realization, and I owned that shit. But in my head, I was like, man, we're kind of poor now, poor looking. And I remember looking at myself and thinking that people were going to look at us differently. I felt embarrassed, like we had gone down a level socially. I thought that trailer represented who we were, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. The crazy thing is, looking back, that trailer wasn't the problem. It was a roof over our heads. My mom was working hard to provide for us. But as a kid, I didn't understand that having a home isn't about what neighborhood it's in or what people think about it. I just knew that I felt different. And the trailer, like I said, it was right across from Sonic. If any of you guys have checked out some parts of my book, it's coming out in the near future, but you will see parts where I start talking about the babysitter, the crackhead babysitters who eventually made a big situation that impacted me the rest of my life. They're the ones that talked me out of my Xbox and my Game Boy. when I was just a little boy, and all I wanted was to impress them and be liked. And at that age, it felt like everything to me. And then eventually a situation got worse. The water heater at that trailer caught on fire, and we ended up getting kicked out. Once again, our housing situation changed. We stayed with my sister for a while, trying to figure things out, trying to find the next place we could land. And there's something that became a pattern throughout my life. We were always looking for the next place, the next apartment, the next trailer, the next temporary solution. We were never really building roots. And eventually we ended up getting into a house. And honestly, that was probably one of the first times where I started to feel like I was becoming somebody, and I was at the age where I was growing more into myself, finding my identity, just trying to figure out who I was. But at the same time, I was also at that age where acceptance meant everything to me. And my mom told me not to hang out with the trailer park kids. And like a lot of kids, when somebody tells you not to do something, what do? We do it. Sometimes it makes you want to do that shit even more. I wanted to fit in, and I wanted people to like me. I wanted to feel accepted. Those kids smoked cigarettes. They had a little spot in my backyard that they would chill when my house was for rent, because it shielded you from like all angles, and they would all meet back there and smoke cigarettes. But why my mom, looking back, instead of understanding why my mom was so worried, I saw it as being included and saw a chance for me to have a new friend group, when really I should have listened to my mom and kept my distance. I saw it finally. Once we started talking, I started riding their bus. It felt like something had clicked. Like I finally had some people around me that accepted me. And I didn't realize it at the time, but that desire to be accepted would follow me for years. That house eventually became a party house. My basement was booming. We threw some razors there, and I had the coolest hangout in the neighborhood. My basement started flooding eventually, and the house had some problems. In 1 month, we had a crazy high power bill, even though the power was out. My sister was still there, I was still there, and there were things happening I didn't understand at the time, but looking back, I can see how much stress my mom was really carrying. She was trying to keep everything together while I was just focused on having fun and being accepted. People would come over, we would tear shit up, tear up the house, have Fight Club in the backyard, but my mom treated all my friends like her own, But they would come over, they would make messes, and she never complained. And I didn't think about it at the time. I didn't understand the value of what we had. I didn't understand how hard my mom worked for every single thing in that house. I thought it was just a house. I didn't understand that it represented years of my mom struggling and sacrificing to give us something better. That is something I regret deeply. Eventually, things got so bad that we get evicted from that place too. And when we left, two of my friends looked around and they decided, this isn't Christian's house anymore. Forget it. And they absolutely destroyed it. They opened paint cans, trashed the place, they ruined it. And because of that, my mom got a judgment on her record, which if you get a judgment, it makes it extremely hard for you to find another place to live. Because when they look at your rental history, they look at, wow, you lived somewhere and tore it up. At the time, I didn't understand the consequences, but it was crazy to me that my friends did that. Looking back, I should have beat their asses, for real. I was just thinking about the moment and not thinking about, the damage that was done to, my mom's. I can see now how having a judgment on your record or something like that, it definitely puts a fork into the spoke of life. But, that moment, that cycle followed us everywhere. Every place we lived, it was another struggle, another obstacle, another reason why stability was just always out of reach. And eventually, this leads us into some of the darkest years of my life. After that house right there on Haymaker Street, things started changing quickly. My mom was trying to figure out where we were going to go next, and eventually we ended up at the Women's Resource Center. And looking back now, I realize how many times people stepped in and helped us when we were at our lowest. There were people who saw our situation and tried to give us a chance, even when our lives were becoming more and more chaotic. They helped us get into an apartment in Cambria, and at the time, I thought it was another fresh start. I thought maybe this time this would be the place where we could settle down. But the truth was, the problems weren't just about where we lived. The problems were about the people, the decisions, the lifestyle. And that was starting to take over my life and my mom's life and my sister's life as well. And that apartment became a place where a lot of bad shit started happening. Looking back now, it is hard to even believe that we got away with some of the stuff we got away with. And there were people coming around constantly, obviously shady looking people. There were, obviously drugs were involved. There were people making horrible decisions, and there were people, using constantly in my mom's house. And, that's a place where they were doing things that should have never been happening there. And at the time, I didn't understand the seriousness of it. But when you're surrounded by chaos long enough, chaos deeply starts to become your normal. And people were coming over, being followed by police. You could tell there would be people working on motorcycles in the living rooms and doing things, looking back now, that were obvious signs of what was happening around us. My mom had lost control of her own home. She really did. And the people around her were taking advantage of that. And I want to be fair when I tell this story, because my mom isn't here anymore. My mom is in heaven. And I love my mom. She had her own battles. She struggled with addiction, but she struggled with mental health. And she struggled with things that I fully didn't understand until I lived through it. Anyway. Alright, hold on. Y'all give me a second. I get teary-eyed when I start talking about my mama. But I also have to be honest about what happened, because the story isn't about pretending everything was perfect. This story is about understanding how we got from there to here. And there were times looking back, I wish somebody would have stepped in harder, and I wish somebody would have forced the situation to change. I wish somebody would have recognized the bad things, recognized how bad things were getting. There were kids, in that house. There were people who needed help. There were situations that should have been handled a lot differently. But the reality is, everybody involved was struggling in their own way. And around that time is when I started making some of the same mistakes I had been watching people make around me. I went from being a kid who was around people doing drugs to eventually becoming a person doing drugs myself. And that is something that is hard to admit, because when you're younger, you don't think that you're going down a road that you got this. You think you're just experimenting just one time. You think that you're just having fun, and you think that you hold all the control. But addiction doesn't announce itself when it enters your life. It doesn't show up and say, "Hey guys, I'm here to ruin everything." It starts small, and it starts with wanting to fit in. It starts with wanting to escape. It starts with wanting to feel accepted. And before you realize what happened, the thing you thought you were controlling is controlling you. And during that time, there was an incident where, let's just say some of the people were involved in some shady activities, and the house got caught on fire. And I remember having my niece in my arms, running out the door, and I watched one of the tweakers get in his car and leave us in the dust. And while everything was happening around me, thankfully, you know, thankfully my sister was able to get the fire under control. But moments like that should have been a definite wake-up call. But to us, it was just another day. They should have made us realize that something had to change. But when you're living in that kind of environment, sometimes even terrifying moments become normal. And that's one of the saddest things about growing up in that type of chaos. You're surrounded by danger and still convince yourself everything is okay because you've seen much worse. Around that time, I also got me a little basset hound. Looking back, I knew I wasn't ready for that responsibility. I got the dog because somebody brought it and said it was chained up and not being taken care of. And I wanted something that depended on me. I wanted something that gave me a sense of purpose. But the truth is, the landlord did not like that shit either. The truth is, I was still trying to find myself completely. I was still searching for an identity. You know, I went from being a stoner kid, trying to figure out where he fit in, to wanting to become part of a completely different world. You know, I went through the music festival phase. I went through the hippie phase. I started trying to create this image of myself. And I wanted to be, at first, like, you know, chilling with all the rave kids and people that are going to festivals. But everything that's going on in my home life, if they knew what was going on, that was even too far for them. But I still wanted to hold on a little bit to my edgy persona and that I had built, and still be a little hippie. But looking back, I was just trying to be accepted. And I was trying to figure out who I was by looking at the people around me instead of looking inside myself. And that's something I would do for years. I was constantly searching for acceptance, searching for a group to belong to, trying to become somebody else because I didn't like who I was becoming. Eventually, just like every other place before it, that apartment situation fell apart too. Once again, we lost our place. Once again, we're needing help. And once again, we find ourselves in a situation where somebody else had to help us get back on our feet. And that's where another chapter in my life began. The hardest part about those years wasn't just not having a home at some parts. The hardest part was slowly losing the belief that I was capable of building one. And when you spend enough time living in survival mode, your entire mindset changes. You stop thinking about 5 years from now. You stop thinking about retirement. You stop thinking about owning a home, building a career, you know, or spending time with your family. Those things feel like they're meant for other people in the world. Your entire world becomes getting through the day. Where am I sleeping tonight? What am I going to eat? How am I going to get through this situation? What problem am I going to have to solve next? And when your life becomes nothing but putting out fires, eventually you forget that you can build something different yourself. And during those years, there were times I slept wherever that I could find a place. You know, truth be told, because my dad's probably going to watch this, I could have went to my dad's house, but I would have had to follow rules there, and I was not into any rules. In my mind, I was a grown-ass man, you know. But there were times we stayed in hotels. Sometimes we slept. One time we slept in my stepdad's car. And there were times, you know, we were just trying to find somewhere to be safe to make it through the night. One of my lowest points was, you know, when, like, so we're fast forwarding way into not too long ago. So what I was getting at is when I was younger, I went through a lot of struggle, you know, with never having a stable place. And that followed me into adulthood. So now we're going to start talking. This is kind of off the timeline, but at one point I started staying in a church parking lot for a couple weeks. Looking back, it's crazy because people would drive by me and never know what was happening. They would see, I would see somebody going to work. They would see somebody walking around. They would see somebody who looked like they were functioning, but behind the scenes, I was barely holding it together. There's something about people I want to understand about homelessness. Not everyone looks that way, people imagine that homeless people looks. I was a fresh-ass homeless dude. Sometimes it's somebody sleeping in a car, but still going to work. Shout out to the people who are going through that. Sometimes it's somebody staying in a hotel, one paycheck away from being on the street. Sometimes it's somebody who looks completely normal on the outside while their entire life has fallen apart privately. That was me. I was trying to keep this image that everything was okay when in reality I had no foundation. And I remember during that time, my mom was living at the Super 8 trying to raise my daughter and do the best she could. And, I say this because my mom deserves respect. And my mom had her struggles. She made her mistakes. But my mom loved her kids. She was fighting her own battles and dealing with her own addiction. And that's what it was. She was trying to be there in the ways she knew how. Looking back now, I think about how scared she must have been, really. She was a mother who wanted better for her kids, but was fighting things inside herself that she couldn't always control. And I was no different. I was fighting my own battles. I just didn't know how to fight them the right way. Eventually, the relationship with my mom, with my wife, who I'm with now, they're like, we went through the same thing together, a lot of hotel hopping, and eventually, there was a time when there was a lot of hurt between me and my mom, and times we couldn't live together because we were both trying to survive while carrying our own problems. The truth is, the woman who is my wife today never gave up on me completely. She helped me from day one. After everything I had put myself through and the people around me through, she still saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. And after I ended up going to jail, y'all have heard it 1,000 times, I begged her to let me come back. I didn't have nowhere else to go. And my next move was going to be, I begged her if I could come stay. She took a chance on me. She allowed me to come stay with her. At first, she had to sneak me in because of the roommate situation. Eventually, the roommate found out, but I started paying some bills and she let me stay. And honestly, that was fair because for a long time, I had been taking chances, taking help, taking people's kindness, but I wasn't giving it back. That was another lesson I had to learn. Being an adult isn't just about wanting another chance. It's about proving that when somebody gives you another chance, you are going to do something different with it. And, that apartment wasn't great. We were all stacked in it like sardines. And there were problems, there were stress, there were arguments, and we're human. But it was the beginning of something beautiful. It was the beginning of me starting to slowly understand that, I had a future. Eventually, we move into the big house that we're in now. But once again, looking back, I found myself asking the same question, where are we going next? But this time there was something different. When I started to realize the answer couldn't always be another person saving me, the answer couldn't be another place letting me in, the answer couldn't be someone else fixing my problems or coming to save me. At some point, I had to become the person who would create stability, I had to become the person who would keep a job, and I had to become a person that would pay their bills and be a father and a partner. I had to become a person who could provide. And that realization was the beginning of everything changing, because getting a house was never really the hardest part. The hardest part was becoming the man who was ready for one. For years, I thought my biggest problem was that I didn't have a place to live. I thought if I got an apartment, if I got a trailer, if I could get the next house, everything would finally be okay. But what I didn't understand was a home is just a building, and home is only as stable as the person living in it. I could have been handed the nicest house in the world, but if I was the same person I was before, I would have found a way to lose that shit quick. The biggest thing I had to change wasn't my address, it was me. I got to the point where I couldn't run for myself anymore. I spent years blaming other people, everything around me. I blamed my circumstances, I blamed my childhood, I blamed other people, I blamed bad luck. And some of those things were real, some of those things did hurt me, and some of those things shaped me. But eventually I had to accept responsibility for everything I had done in my life and the hand I was dealt. Because at the end of the day, nobody else was going to live my life for me. Nobody else was going to make any decisions for me. Nobody else was going to wake up every morning and choose what kind of man I was going to become. That responsibility belonged to me. And I remember being in jail and having a conversation with the OG who told me something that changed the way I looked at things. He said, your life is like a table. A table needs to stand on 4 legs. If you build those legs out of the wrong things, eventually... And he explained it that if your life is built on drugs, crime, anger, or revenge, those things are going to destroy you. And that table might stand for a little while, but eventually those legs are going to break. And when they break, everything comes crashing down. And when I thought about my life, I realized exactly, that's exactly what happened. My table was built on a broken foundation. And I was trying to build a future on things that were guaranteed to destroy it. I had to replace those legs. I had to put the new legs, they had to be recovery, they had to be work, they had to be my family, my podcasts, my accountability, and my kids and things I loved instead of crime, greed, money, and selfishness. And that wasn't something that happened overnight. That wasn't something that happened one magical day where everything became easy. It was thousands of small decisions. It was waking up and doing what I said I was going to do. It was showing up for work even when I didn't feel like it. It was learning how to keep a job instead of always finding a reason to quit. It was learning how to deal with problems without running back to the same things that almost killed me. It was learning that nobody was coming to save me. I had to save myself. And when I first started rebuilding my life, nobody saw my progress or took me seriously. And why would they? I had gave them this same song and dance for so long. And nobody, they don't see it until you prove it. And actions speak louder than words. Nobody's going to pat you on the back for waking up early. That's just got to be on you. Nobody sees you going to work tired. Nobody sees you putting money aside instead of wasting it. Nobody sees you fighting battles inside your own head every single day. But people usually only see the result. They see the house, the success. They see the finished product. But they don't see all of the days where you had to choose to keep going. And I started working on building a routine. I started understanding that having a job wasn't just a paycheck. It was somewhere that I could be dependent on. For years, I was a guy who couldn't hold anything together. A job, a house, I couldn't manage no money. I couldn't keep a promise. I couldn't be trusted. I couldn't be the person my family needed to be. But slowly, day by day, I started becoming somebody different. I started realizing that being a man wasn't about what I said. It was about what I did. Anybody can make a promise. Anybody can say that they're going to change. but change is proven by your actions when nobody is watching. And eventually, all those small choices start adding up. The same person who once didn't know where he was going to sleep was now thinking about building a future. The same person who used to spend every dollar on Fetty and trying to survive was now thinking about saving. The same person who once tried to destroy every opportunity in front of him, he was now protecting opportunities in front of him. Then came the day I thought would never happen. The day me and my wife became homeowners. And a house is something I never had, and I wish my mom could be here to see it so bad, and I'm so stoked. It's something my mom always dreamed about, and she never got to experience owning her own home. She never got to walk into a place and say, "This is mine." And this is something I think about a lot, because I know if my mom could see this today, that she would be proud. I know she's looking down on me, and she's so proud. She's smiling from heaven, because this house represents a lot more to me than just a house. It represents where I am. It represents breaking a cycle for generations. We were stuck renting, moving, starting over, trying to survive. But now my wife and I have something that belongs to us. We have somewhere our family can make memories. We have somewhere our kids can feel safe. And we have somewhere we can come home to. When I walk through those rooms, I don't just see walls. I see every place I came from. I see the trailer where I thought we were poor. I see the houses we lost. I see the shelters, the hotels, the cars, and I see the nights where I didn't know what tomorrow was going to bring or what it was going to look like. And I realized something. All those places were chapters. They weren't a whole story. The homeless version of me isn't who I was. It was just where I was at that point in my journey. And the reason I'm sharing this is not to make, not to preach or, make anyone feel sorry for me, because I own this shit and I love who I am. And if the stuff wouldn't have happened to me, I wouldn't be who I am today. And, I'm not going to pretend like I don't make mistakes now or like I didn't make mistakes then. I have made a shit ton of mistakes. I've made more mistakes than good choices, for sure. I've hurt a lot of people. I've hurt a shit ton of people. I've been very selfish and I made decisions I regret, but I also changed. And that's a message I want people to take from this. Your past can explain you, but it doesn't have to define you. And you can come from nothing and build something. You can lose everything and rebuild. You can make mistakes and still become somebody you're proud of. And this house isn't proof that I'm better than anybody. It's proof that change is possible. Because the biggest accomplishment wasn't buying a home. The biggest accomplishment is becoming the kind of person who can keep one. And after a lifetime of never having something that was truly mine, I can finally say, this is home. Well, I'll show you guys whenever we're moving in. I think I'm going to do a vlog and stuff. I hope you guys enjoyed. Peace.